It's now 80 years since the end of World War II. And if you were 20 years old, like my great-grandfather was in 1945, you're probably not around today to tell your story. There were literally millions of people who served in the Second World War from across the Allies. But today I want to talk about one that's particularly close to myself and my family. My great-grandfather, Ted Hyde, served as a gunner on a Avro Halifax bomber in the Second World War. He began service in 1943 at the age of 18 years old. By the time the war ended in 1945, he was 20. Just think of that. A young man today, 18 years old, and seeing 2 years of war, flying over 30 missions over enemy territory, all before the age of 20. My great-grandfather, Ted Hyde, served in a Halifax bomber called Friday the 13th. And it actually has a very interesting name for that reason, because when these Halifax bombers first started going on their missions, they didn't really have names. They had designations. The first mission that they went out, all of the Halifax bombers with the F designation were shot down. The second time they went out, all the Halifax bombers with the F designation were also taken out. The third time that they went out, the crew decided to dub the plane Friday the 13th as some sort of gallows humor to outline the fact that the record wasn't very good for planes that had an F designation, so they might as well give it a cursed name because they were likely to go down anyways. That plane proceeded to fly about 128 missions over enemy territory, and it wasn't shot down. My great-grandfather flew in many of those missions, both at night and during the day. And some of the stories that he had passed down to my grandfather, who has now passed down to me, are truly amazing. He told stories of how one time the plane had 7 holes that had been blown through it by enemy flak fire that were big enough for a man to crawl through. That the engine had been blown out and that the plane many times was going to crash land over enemy territory, but just managed to make it back over the English Channel. There's the flight engineer, a man by the name of Hawthorne, who wrote a fascinating story about how they were returning from a mission in Chemnitz, which was in the eastern part of Germany near Dresden, and the clouds were so low to the ground that they couldn't actually see where they were, and the engines weren't working because they had been hit, and so they couldn't rise above the clouds. And so the pilot asked the engineer what the highest elevation in the area was so that he could ensure that he wouldn't hit anything like a mountain or a building. And they said 1,500 feet. And so they climbed to 2,000 feet. Well, they were quite shocked when one of the gunners in the plane who was looking out could see telephone poles and houses flying by very close underside the plane. So they had to proceed to go back up into the clouds, where those who are into aviation will know the icing on the wings is really dangerous for wings. So the pilot is trying to keep the plane at a good altitude and notices that there's a light in the distance and decides that they're going to fix that light as the point that they're going to follow, only to discover that the light was somebody riding a bicycle ahead of them who had to quickly jump into the ditch to avoid getting hit. Just think about it. My great-grandfather was only 18 when he went overseas and flew planes over enemy territory, being attacked by the Luftwaffe, who were trying to shoot down the bombers, the flak fighters on the ground. He had flown dozens of missions by the time he was 20 years old when the war ended. Think about what 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds are doing today, and just know how blessed we are in a world where 18 to 20-year-olds will probably never have to face the kind of challenges and the kind of risks to their lives that people like my great-grandfather faced. This is a story of remembrance. He got to come home. He got to build a life for himself in Canada and have a family and grandkids and great-grandchildren such as myself. But there were so many that didn't come home. And they're one of the many reasons why we observe Remembrance Day every year on November 11th. To not only remember those that came back who served, but to remember those who didn't come back. Friday the 13th survived the war, But sadly, after the war, the British government, in order to save money, decided to scrap a lot of these planes. In fact, a number of years ago, I had the honor to visit the London Air Museum, where a cutout part of the Friday the 13th with the number of missions that they fought is actually on the wall of the London Air Museum in England. But a number of years ago, I was really pleased to see that the Yorkshire Air Museum in England had actually recreated a model of the Friday the 13th for their museum. And I want to thank them for sending a video so that you can see just what kind of planes people like my great-grandfather and many others fought in. Now, Remembrance Day is something that only happens once a year, but it's critical, I think, that we always remember those who gave the ultimate sacrifice and those who served our country in time of war. And that's why, on Remembrance Day, we remember.